When my brother lost everything, I was the only one who helped him. After he turned his life around, he started treating me like I was nothing. By the time my brother's girlfriend smiled over the cake and implied my work was basically me talking into a closet for grocery money, I had already spent the afternoon gluing paper stars to the wall for my daughter's kindergarten project and recording a fake, cheerful phone prompt for a dentist office that still owed me half the invoice. So no, I wasn't exactly in the mood for family comedy night. My name is Nadine, and if you met me then, you probably would have thought I had things sort of under control. Not glamorous, not impressive, but controlled in that very American way where your rent is paid, your car starts most mornings, your kid has lunch packed, and you cry only in private locations like parking lots and laundry rooms. I made a living doing voice work for local ads, training videos, phone systems, radio spots, all the unsexy little audio jobs nobody thinks about until the voice on the line tells them to press 1 for billing. I worked from a tiny room in my apartment with foam squares on the wall and a blanket clipped over a shelf because sound treatment is expensive and I like electricity too much to stop paying for it. My daughter was 5 then, all skinny legs and missing patience, and I'd adopted her as a baby after fostering her for almost a year. That decision had never been a quiet one in my family. My mother acted like I had brought home a moral debate instead of a child. My father never came right out and said he disapproved, but he had a whole style of silence that managed to say plenty. My younger brother, though, loved her from the start. He used to sit on my kitchen floor and let her put plastic barrettes in his hair while asking me about jobs and girlfriends and taxes and how to write an email that sounded professional without sounding weird. He was the one person in my family who could still make me soften when I was already halfway to a grudge. That was probably why I kept swallowing things I should have spat back out. At my parents' house that night, the table was full of the usual cheap paper plates, overcooked chicken, and tension disguised as small talk. My brother had brought the woman he was seeing, the one he met in a business program, and talked about like she had descended from the sky holding a planner and a future. She was polished in a way that made the rest of us look thumbprinted. Hair smooth, nails done, voice crisp, eyes always scanning the room like she was ranking furniture. She asked me about work, and I answered the way I always did, because if you freelance long enough, you learn to speak about your job with the confidence of someone who isn't tired of defending it. I said I had a steady list of clients. I worked from home. I liked the flexibility because of my daughter. And then she smiled that thin smile and said, "Loud enough for everybody." That kind of thing is fine when it's just you, I guess. But unstable work gets risky when real people depend on you. Real people. As if the child who called me mom and slept with one sock on because she hated matching sensations was some decorative side project. I actually laughed at first because sometimes your brain protects you by assuming surely nobody just said what they said. My brother looked down at his plate. My mother did that fake hostess chuckle and told everyone to calm down because no one meant anything. My father said families shouldn't fight over opinions. Opinions, right. I felt heat shoot up my neck, and for a second I wanted to say something mean and accurate, which is my spiritual gift. Instead, I took a sip of flat soda and asked if anyone wanted more cake. Later, after I'd loaded my sleepy kid into her car seat and texted a client about a revised script, my brother called me crying, full-on crying, said she was under stress, said she came from a family that judged unstable careers, said he knew what she said was out of line, said please don't hold it against him because he loved me and he hated being stuck in the middle. I wish I could tell you I gave some wise speech about boundaries. I didn't. I stood by the gas pump in my work sneakers and told him it was fine even though it wasn't, because he was my little brother and because he sounded scared that love might cost him something. That was our family pattern in one scene, honestly. Someone would say something ugly, someone else would cry, and suddenly the ugliest person in the room would somehow need the most comfort. Things got worse in boring, believable ways, which is how most family damage works. There was no dramatic villain music, just a steady drip of comments that left me damp and furious. Over the next year or so, while they dated and posted their polished little milestones on a social media app and brought expensive appetizers to holidays they absolutely could not afford, she kept finding ways to remind me that in her mind I was temporary. Not a bad person exactly, just a cautionary tale in soft pants. At a summer cookout in my parents' yard, while my daughter chased bubbles with one shoe missing, she asked me in front of everybody when I planned to give her real stability. I said she had real stability. She had a home, health coverage through the state program I fought tooth and nail to keep updated, bedtime stories, routine, school registration completed on time, and a mother who knew every nightmare by theme. She tilted her head and said children do better with structure, by which she meant a man. She never said it plain at first. She liked her cruelty with a lace edge. My brother stared into his drink and mumbled something about people having different paths. My mother jumped in to ask whether anyone wanted more corn. That was another family specialty, by the way. Emotional arson followed by side dishes. They got married when they were both still in that age where people think matching wedding party robes are a personality. The ceremony was bigger than their budget and longer than my daughter's patience. She was 6 and trying hard, which made it worse to watch. She spilled juice at the reception. Not a whole tray, not a scene, just one cup tipping over because somebody had wedged her chair too close to a table leg. My sister-in-law looked at the stain on the tablecloth like my child had spray-painted an insult across the wall and muttered that some kids weren't taught how to behave at formal events. I heard it. She knew I heard it. My brother heard it too, and he did what he always did when the truth made him uncomfortable. He acted very busy. I kept going because life didn't pause for emotional humiliation. I recorded a series of training modules for a hardware supplier. I booked a local tourism campaign. I fought with my landlord about a broken vent. My daughter lost a front tooth and decided this meant she now looked more like a shark, which she considered flattering. My brother kept calling privately for advice about money and job interviews and whether he and his wife were ready to buy a better car. He still wanted my opinion when he needed grounding. He just didn't want to be seen agreeing with me in public. Then they had what they called their bold season, which is the kind of phrase people use right before they do something expensive and dumb. 2 years into the marriage, they announced they were quitting their jobs to start an event supply business. Nothing enormous, just a local company renting decor pieces, party backdrops, folding furniture, all the polished stuff people want for showers and brand launches and birthday dinners they can't really afford but want photographed anyway. My brother called me late one night and asked what I really thought. I said, did he want the loving answer or the useful one? He said both. So I told him. I said startup costs would chew through them faster than they expected. I said inconsistent bookings could sink them before repeat business had time to grow. I said storage rent, transport, damage, insurance, all of it adds up even when business is decent, and they didn't have the cushion they were pretending to have. He got quiet. Then he thanked me. Then, 2 days later, his wife told me at my parents' house that creative people usually panic around practical business decisions because they're not used to the real world. I asked if she meant the real world where people pay invoices late, or the real world where adults insult the person they're asking for free advice. She gave me that smile again, the one that made me want to throw a dinner roll at her forehead. My mother hissed my name like I was the embarrassing one. My brother texted me later that I should try to understand how stressed she was. Imagine being told to understand the stress of someone who keeps stepping on your neck and calling it concern. They moved forward anyway. Security deposit on a commercial space. Used inventory. Financing through savings, credit cards, optimism, and lies they told themselves in the mirror. I offered to connect them with a couple of small production contacts I knew through voiceover work because marketing teams overlap with event people more than you'd think. She said they had their own network. A month later, my brother called me from the parking lot outside their space and admitted he was terrified. He said the promised contracts from college friends hadn't turned into signed jobs. He said they had 2 small bookings and a lot of empty calendar. I told him fear wasn't an omen. It was just fear. I also told him fear plus debt plus pride is a nasty mix. He laughed in this cracked little way and said she still believed completely. That was supposed to comfort him. Mostly, it made me cold. The business lasted 5 months, which was longer than I expected and shorter than they needed. At first, they kept performing success. My brother posted careful little photos of stacked inventory, mood boards, van doors open at dawn, captions about building dreams and trusting the process. In real life, they were taking any job that came through, even the small ones that barely covered fuel. A baby shower in a church hall, a retirement lunch with 2 balloon stands and rented chairs, a boutique opening where the owner paid them late and complained anyway. My brother would call me on his drive home sounding cheerful in a way that made me tired just listening to it. It wasn't happiness, it was panic in a suit. By the 3rd month, the edges started showing. Their main prospective client for the season backed out because of budget shifts, which is business language for we found somebody cheaper or we changed our minds. The landlord on the commercial space started sending warnings about overdue rent. They used credit cards to cover inventory repairs, then used another credit card to cover the first ones. They borrowed from friends with the kind of desperate confidence people use when they're too ashamed to admit they're borrowing, not bridging. They sold the nicer car. They listed wedding gifts online. They stopped coming to family events, which honestly was the first holiday season I remember enjoying the potato salad. Then one evening, my mother called and asked if I'd heard from my brother because he wasn't answering. I said no. She said his wife sounded strange in a text. My stomach dropped anyway, because when family chaos has been simmering for years, you start recognizing the smell before anything boils over. He showed up at my apartment the next afternoon alone. I opened the door expecting a random visit and instead got my brother standing there like somebody had let the air out of him. Same jacket he wore to work interviews, beard overgrown, eyes red, lips chapped. He asked if he could come in. My daughter was in the living room building a blanket cave and immediately yelled his name like he was still the fun uncle from before life got ugly. He hugged her so hard it made me nervous. We sat at my tiny kitchen table while the cheap fan in the window rattled like it was judging us. He kept rubbing his palms on his jeans. Finally, he said they were being evicted from their apartment. 4 months behind. The business was dead. They had gone back to old jobs, but the paychecks were already swallowed by debt. He said he knew I had every reason to say no, and then he asked if they could stay with me for a little while until they got stable. I actually asked where his wife was. He looked at the floor and said she was in the car because she was too ashamed to come in first. That almost made me laugh, and I don't mean because it was funny. I mean because there it was again, the weird little theater of my family where everybody else's feelings arrived first and mine had to wait politely in the hallway. I said if she wanted help, she could come upstairs and use her own voice. So she did, eventually. She came in with mascara tracks down her face and no trace of the polished woman who used to critique my life like she was grading homework. She apologized. Not elegantly, not perfectly, but directly enough that I believed she at least understood how bad things had gotten. She said she'd been arrogant. She said she'd said cruel things. She said she never thought they'd end up asking me for help. My brother cried again. My daughter, who of course sensed adult drama like weather, brought over a stuffed animal and offered it to my sister-in-law as if grief could be solved by a plush rabbit. I wish I could tell you I made them sweat. I didn't. I looked around my apartment, at the second bedroom I used for recording and occasional storage, at the stack of craft supplies by the couch, at my daughter's little shoes by the door, and I said yes. Temporary, I said. They both agreed so fast it was almost violent. Gratitude poured out of them in this dizzying rush. They promised they'd never forget it. They said I was saving them. My brother held my hand and said I was the only one who really came through. Even then, some ugly little voice in me thought, okay, but will you remember that when you're comfortable again? I hated that the voice existed. I also hated that it was right so often. Living with family only works when everybody is humble or rich, and we were neither. I moved my recording setup into a corner of my bedroom and gave them the second room. That meant my workday became a weird dance of whispering around naps, waiting for quiet, asking people not to slam doors, and recording cheerful scripts about customer care while resenting the fact that 3 adults were now sharing one bathroom and most of the emotional labor was somehow still mine. They both had jobs again. Every cent they made, according to them, went to debt and catching up on the bills they'd left bleeding behind. I believed that part. What I didn't enjoy was how quickly gratitude started growing opinions. At first, it was little things. My sister-in-law reorganized my kitchen to make it flow better. Translation. She moved my pans, spices, lunch containers, and coffee filters into places that made sense only to her. She bought discount labels and stuck them on my cabinets without asking. She commented on what time my daughter ate dinner. She suggested a stricter bedtime. She asked if screen time before school was maybe why she got distracted in class. Mind you, my kid was doing fine. Not perfect, because she was a child, and not a military recruit, but fine. It was like my sister-in-law couldn't stand being dependent unless she could still create a hierarchy somewhere, and the easiest target was my home. My brother mostly avoided conflict by being gone. Extra shifts, longer commutes, mysterious errands. He'd come home smelling like fast food in shame, kiss my daughter's head, thank me too quickly, and disappear into the guest room. Sometimes late at night, he'd sit in my kitchen while I edited audio and admit he felt like a failure. Those were the moments when he sounded like himself again. The brother who used to ask me how to fix his resume and whether a girl who corrected his grammar on dates was a red flag. He said his wife was trying her best. He said she was struggling with the humiliation of needing help. I said needing help doesn't make somebody cruel. He didn't argue. He just stared at the table. Money got tighter for me too, of course. I covered the bigger grocery runs because it was easier and because they always seemed one paycheck away from disaster. I canceled a little weekend trip I'd planned with my daughter to a lake cabin 2 hours away because it felt obscene to spend on rest when 3 adults were eating out of one fridge and my electric bill had jumped from everybody charging devices and running fans. I didn't resent them every second. That's the thing. If I had, maybe I would have protected myself better. There were mornings when my sister-in-law packed my daughter's lunch because I was on a deadline. There were nights when my brother handled bath time and bedtime stories while I re-recorded a project with a last-minute script change. We had almost family moments that confused me. Movie nights on the couch, shared takeout, jokes about the neighbor's dramatic breakup. Those are dangerous moments, honestly. They make you think history is softening when really it's just napping. One night during dinner, my sister-in-law said, in this weirdly airy voice, that once they were back on their feet, they would obviously return to the kind of standard of living they were meant for. Meant for. I nearly choked on pasta. My daughter asked what standard meant. I said it meant your aunt was tired and talking nonsense. My sister-in-law smiled, but not kindly. My brother stared at his plate again. If I sound bitter about the plate thing, it's because a grown man can only investigate mashed potatoes so many times before it starts looking like a personality defect. Months passed like that. Awkwardly. Loudly. Expensively. Then one night, after my daughter finally went to sleep and the apartment was blessedly quiet except for my cheap desk fan clicking like loose bones, my brother sat across from me at the table and said he couldn't do his old job anymore. It paid too little. The manager treated him like he was disposable, and every morning he felt sick driving there. He said he knew he had no right to ask for more help. But did I know anybody? Anybody at all? Any client? Any contact? Anything better? I said maybe. I actually did know somebody. One of my regular clients ran a regional clothing company and sometimes needed junior administrative help because his business was growing faster than his systems. He trusted me because I always delivered on time, fixed mistakes without drama, and never pretended chaos was strategy. I told my brother I could ask for an interview. Nothing more. He looked so relieved I almost hated him a little for making me feel responsible again. My sister-in-law cried when he told her. This time, it wasn't humiliation crying. It was hopeful crying, which somehow landed differently. She thanked me like she'd finally recognized I was useful in a language she respected. She said maybe this was the turning point. My brother hugged me and said he'd never forget it. There it was again. Never forget. The phrase should have come with a warranty. I called my client the next morning from my parked car outside my daughter's school because I didn't want anyone overhearing me make a favor-sounding request. I kept it simple. I said my brother was reliable, organized, desperate to get out of a bad job, and capable if somebody gave him a shot. I did not say he had a talent for letting women insult me while pretending he was trapped by circumstances. My client laughed and said he trusted my judgment more than most resumes anyway. He agreed to interview him for an entry-level operations role. When I told my brother, he looked like somebody had opened a window in a burning room. The interview happened 3 days later. He borrowed one of my nicer folders because he didn't own anything that didn't still smell faintly like panic. He got the job by the end of the week. Junior role, modest pay, room to grow. Nothing glamorous but real. Stable. His wife hugged me so hard my shoulder popped. She said I had changed their lives. My brother kept saying thank you in this broken, stunned voice that made me feel good in a way I don't entirely trust in myself. Being needed can become its own addiction. He did well there. Better than I expected, honestly. He learned fast, showed up early, and actually seemed hungry in a useful way instead of the performative hustle he'd done during the business mess. Over the next several months, he got better at the work and more comfortable around the owner. Then he got a raise, then a better title. Not executive of the century stuff, just the kind of steady progress that can save a household if people stop trying to impress imaginary judges. Eventually, they moved out into a small apartment across town. I helped carry boxes because of course I did. My daughter cried because she'd gotten used to her uncle being there all the time. My sister-in-law walked through the new place talking about fresh starts and healthier energy and how quickly they'd recovered once they got the right opportunity. I noticed the wording, but I let it go. Again, she didn't mention who created that opportunity. My brother didn't either. At first, I told myself that gratitude doesn't always need a speech. Sometimes people thank you by doing better. But then family conversations started sounding weird. At lunch with my parents one Sunday, my brother talked about how hard he had worked to rebuild after the business failure. True. He talked about long hours, discipline, swallowing his pride, making the most of a second chance. Also true. He never once said how he got that second chance in the first place. My mother nodded like he'd pulled himself out of a flood with his teeth. My father said adversity builds character. I waited for the missing sentence. It never came. Afterward, I asked my brother privately why he hadn't mentioned the referral. He got embarrassed immediately, said he hated revisiting that period. Said he didn't want every conversation about his new job to include a reminder that he'd needed help. I said acknowledging reality isn't humiliation unless you're still lying to yourself. He asked me not to make it weird. I said it already was weird. He kissed my cheek like I was being dramatic and left before I could decide whether to be furious or just tired. Time passed. More promotions, better clothes, a nicer haircut, different posture. You could watch his self-image coming back in pieces. And right alongside it, my sister-in-law's old personality came strolling home like she'd just been on vacation. The little comments returned first. Then the distancing. Then the rewriting. I found out through a cousin that she had started telling people living with me had been complicated, which is a sly little word, isn't it? It can hide almost anything. Complicated, according to her, meant I liked reminding them they were in my space. Me asking them to clean the bathroom became me controlling the house. Me working around quiet hours became me treating them like children. Me covering groceries and utilities turned into me using money to feel superior. I actually sat in my car in a pharmacy lot and laughed when I first heard it, because I thought surely nobody would believe something that stupid. Then my mother called me that same week and said, maybe I should stop bringing up everything I did for them, because it made them uncomfortable. I said name one time I brought it up. She couldn't. She just said peace matters more than being right. That sentence explains half my life. My sister-in-law slid all the way back into her old self with almost admirable speed. At a cousin's birthday dinner, I heard her across the room telling one of my aunts that they had to get out of my place quickly because the environment wasn't healthy. She said I was intense. Said I kept score. Said I liked them depending on me because it let me play savior. The wild part was, she said all this while holding a slice of cake I'd helped pay for because I was the one who sent money when that cousin got laid off 2 months earlier. Family memory is so selective it should be illegal. When I confronted my brother by text, he called instead of replying, which he only did when he knew typed words might expose him later. He said his wife was just venting. I said venting isn't lying. He said maybe I had made them feel indebted sometimes. I nearly drove off the road. Indebted. They had been indebted. That wasn't a feeling problem. That was just math with emotions attached. He got irritated and said I was stuck in the past. I said the past seemed very alive for somebody using it to smear me. He ended the call with that wounded tone he used when he wanted to feel attacked instead of accountable. By then, well over a year had passed since they'd moved out, and my brother had stacked enough raises and steadier paychecks to start sounding like stability had always belonged to him. Around then, they started talking about buying a house. A modest little place in a suburb with older trees and manageable payments. Nothing huge. On paper, I was happy for them. Genuine. Or as genuinely as a person can be, while resenting the fact that the ladder they climbed kept getting painted to look self-built. My daughter was thrilled because she assumed a house meant weekend sleepovers and backyard barbecues, and her uncle pushing her on a swing. I let her imagine it because I still hadn't fully accepted what was happening. Some stupid piece of me thought blood would reassert itself. That gratitude might show up late, a little wrinkled but present. Then my mother called one afternoon asking what gift I planned to bring to their housewarming. I said, what housewarming? The silence on the line was so sharp I could hear her realize she'd said the quiet part too early. She stammered something about maybe the invitation hadn't reached me yet. I already knew. My whole body knew before my mind caught up. I asked when it was. She said Saturday. 3 days away. I thanked her in this very calm voice that meant danger and hung up. I called my brother immediately. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding annoyed, like I'd interrupted a perfectly nice lie. I asked whether there was a reason I hadn't been invited to the party. He said, flat out, flat, that his wife didn't want tension in their new home. I said tension. You mean me? He said there was resentment on both sides and they wanted a peaceful, fresh start. I honestly laughed so hard I scared myself. Fresh start for whom? Certainly not for the person whose couch they had cried on. I asked if he had told people I wasn't invited. He said it wasn't anybody's business. I said it's definitely my business if people think I chose not to come. He got cold then. Said he was tired of me acting like they owed me forever. There it was. The sentence underneath all the others. Not that they were grateful and ashamed, not that they valued me, but wanted distance. No, they were angry that help came with memory. My daughter heard enough of the call to understand we weren't included. She sat on the arm of the couch afterward and asked why her uncle didn't want us at his new house. I told her adults get weird when they're embarrassed. She asked if she had done something wrong at the wedding a long time ago. That nearly ended me. I said absolutely not. I said sometimes people decide to blame whoever saw them struggle because it feels easier than feeling seen. She nodded like she understood, but she was little. So really, she just understood that people she loved were acting strange. For 2 straight days, I bounced between rage and humiliation. I cleaned too much. I checked the same email chain 4 times. I rehearsed speeches in the shower. I told myself to let it go because showing up uninvited is exactly the kind of thing people use later to call you unstable. Then I heard from an aunt that my sister-in-law had been telling people they bought the house without depending on anybody, and that they had rebuilt through pure discipline and faith. Pure discipline and faith. I sat on the edge of my bed with my laptop open and stared at the referral emails I still had from my client. Not because I save blackmail material, to be clear. I'm just freelance and disorganized in all the normal ways. So old threads pile up forever. I should have deleted them. Or maybe I shouldn't have. Depends who you ask. Saturday came and I spent the morning trying to be the kind of woman who rises above things. I folded laundry. I took my daughter to a discount store for poster board and glue sticks. I answered a client revision request. I even told myself out loud, in my own kitchen, that not every betrayal needs an audience. Then my aunt texted me a photo from the party. My parents smiling in the new living room. My brother holding a tray of drinks. My sister-in-law in a cream sweater that said effortless, but definitely took effort. Caption, so proud of these two for doing it all on their own. That's when I lost all interest in dignity. I didn't bring my daughter. I took her to a friend's apartment first and said I'd be back soon. I printed the email thread from my client because apparently I contain multitudes, one of them petty and office supply based. Then I drove to their new house with my hands shaking so badly I almost missed the turn. The place was nice. Fresh paint, little patch of yard, folding chairs out back, music playing low through a speaker. I stood on the porch hearing laughter inside and had one last sane thought, which was leave, get in the car, go home. Eat cereal over the sink and let these people be awful without your participation. But then my mother opened the door because somebody else was arriving behind me, and her face when she saw me told me everything. She didn't look surprised that I was hurt. She looked inconvenienced that hurt had shown up in visible form. The room went quiet in that horrible social way, where nobody stops moving exactly. But all the movement becomes fake. My sister-in-law crossed the room so fast it would have been impressive if I liked her. She hissed that this wasn't the time. One of my aunts, already 2 drinks in and blessedly nosy, asked why on earth I hadn't been invited if I was here with a gift. I said because I wasn't invited. Loud enough, clean enough. The room shifted. My brother came over with the expression of a man who thinks reality should have stayed in the trunk. He told me we could talk outside. I said no, actually, we've done enough private conversations that end in public lies. My mother started saying my name like a warning siren. I didn't scream. That's the annoying part. I was calmer than everybody expected, which gave my words more weight than if I'd been sobbing. I said I didn't come to ruin their housewarming. I came because I was tired of hearing a fake version of my own life repeated back to me by people who had slept under my roof, eaten food I paid for, and built their recovery on help they now treated like contamination. My sister-in-law tried to cut in and say I was making everything about myself. I asked if she wanted me to go line by line. Then I did. I said when their business failed, they came to me on the edge of eviction. I said they lived in my apartment for months while I moved my job into my bedroom and carried the extra bills. I said I listened to their crying, their panic, their promises. I said when my brother couldn't stand his job and asked for another chance, I put my own professional reputation on the line and got him an interview with a client who trusted me. Then I held up the printed emails and said if anybody needed documentation because memory was suddenly fashionable, I had it. The room did that awful collective inhale people do when a secret turns physical. My brother looked sick. My sister-in-law went white first, then red. She said his growth at the company was his own. I said, of course it was. And getting through a door still matters when you didn't open it yourself. One of my cousins asked if this was true. My brother, after what felt like a century, said yes, but there is always a but when people want accountability diluted. He started saying he had worked hard. And I said nobody was denying that. I was denying the lie that they had done everything alone while painting me as controlling for not pretending amnesia was maturity. My mother snapped then. Not at them. At me. She said this was cruel and humiliating. I asked whether humiliation only counted when it happened in nice houses. My father told me to leave. My aunt muttered that maybe I should have been invited in the first place. Another relative said my brother should have acknowledged help with grace instead of making it a scandal. It turned into one of those family arguments where 10 people are talking and nobody is listening and everybody keeps choosing the version of the truth that protects their favorite person. My sister-in-law started crying hard, messy crying, and ran down the hall. My brother followed her without looking at me. That was the part that landed deepest, weirdly. Not the insults, not the exclusion, just him physically choosing her version again, in front of everybody, while my words were still hanging in the room like smoke. I left before anybody could reframe me in real time. I got back in my car, shut the door, and shook so hard I couldn't start the engine for a full minute. The fallout started before I even got home. My phone lit up at red lights, in parking lots, while I stood in line picking up my daughter. While I sat on the edge of her bed, later pretending I wasn't dissociating through bedtime stories about woodland animals with healthier boundaries than my relatives. Some texts said I was brave, some said I was petty. My mother sent 3 messages in a row about how I had chosen spectacle over peace, which is rich coming from a woman who treated peace like a decorative throw pillow she only cared about when guests were over. My father sent exactly 1 line. You embarrassed your brother in his own home. Notice how nobody ever said my brother embarrassed himself by lying. Fascinating little loophole. My brother texted me the next morning. Not a call. Not even close. Just a long message about betrayal, how he never expected me to weaponize help, how I had humiliated his wife in front of family, how he needed distance for the foreseeable future. Distance for the foreseeable future is such therapy language nonsense when what you mean is, I'm mad you didn't stay quiet. He said he loved me, but couldn't have me in his life while I was committed to punishing him. I read that message sitting in my kitchen in yesterday's shirt while my coffee went cold and felt this weird split inside myself. One part of me wanted to defend every detail. The other part was so tired that all it could think was, wow, he really built himself a whole alternate universe and moved in. I wrote 12 replies in my head and sent none of them, which, for me, counts as sainthood. The family group chat went weird immediately. My cousin tried posting neutral things like recipes and school photos. My mother responded to everybody except me. My aunt, bless her messy heart, privately told me half the family thought I had every right to expose them, and the other half thought I had ruined a special milestone out of jealousy. Jealousy of what, exactly, I'm still not clear on. Their mortgage? Their crown of selective memory? My daughter asked why her grandparents weren't answering the thank you drawing she'd sent the week before. I said grown-ups can act childish when they feel guilty. She said that sounded backwards. I said yes, it does. A few weeks later, it was my daughter's birthday. I invited everybody anyway because some stubborn part of me still believed adults should have to actively choose being cruel, not just drift into it. None of them came. Not my parents, not my brother, not his wife, not even a half-hearted excuse. My daughter wore a paper tiara from the party store and tried to pretend she wasn't checking the door every time footsteps passed in the hall. That image will stay in my body forever, I think. Her trying to smile through face paint while waiting for people who had already decided she was collateral damage. Friends came. 2 of my neighbors came. A mom from school brought her son and extra juice boxes. My regular client, the one who had hired my brother, stopped by with a gift bag for my daughter because he happened to be nearby and because he is, annoyingly, one of the more decent men I've known. We stood by the kitchen counter while kids chased balloons through the living room, and he asked how my brother was doing because things had seemed off at work lately. He didn't go into details, but I could tell from his tone that whatever was happening wasn't sitting well with him. I didn't dump the full family drama on him. I just said things were tense. He looked at me for a second in that careful business owner way and then said, very quietly, that if my brother expected another rescue, it wasn't coming from the company. He had earned the job originally because of me, yes, but he had kept it by his own work until recently. Lately, though, he was coasting and resentful and acting entitled when corrected. I said I understood, and I did, more than I wanted to. The sad part is I still felt sick hearing it, because no matter how angry I was, some piece of my brain still heard he is in trouble and translated it into, go help him. I didn't. But the reflex was there. That made me feel almost as pathetic as the family group chat did. 3 weeks after the birthday party, my brother lost his job. I didn't hear it from him first, of course. I heard it through my mother, who called in that breathless tone she used when she wanted to sound concerned, but was actually preparing a charge sheet. She said the company had let him go, and his wife was devastated, and this was a terrible time for the family, and she hoped I was happy. I asked if she truly believed I had the power to make a grown man ignore repeated warnings at work. She said influence comes in many forms. That was her answer whenever she didn't have facts, just a mood and a target. I called my client after that, mostly because I needed to hear the timeline from somebody who wasn't narrating through martyrdom. He was gentle about it, said he'd given my brother more than one chance, but things had been slipping for a while and the decision hadn't been sudden. He didn't dump all the details on me, but I could read between the lines. He said he regretted how it would affect me personally, but the decision had been overdue. I thanked him for being honest. Then I sat in my car outside a pet store for 10 minutes staring at a discount bird feeder like it had answers. That evening, my brother showed up at my apartment without warning. He pounded on the door hard enough to scare my daughter. I told her to go to her room and turn up her movie. Then I opened the door, and there he was, face flushed, breathing like he'd run up the stairs, fueled entirely by self-pity. He didn't say hello, didn't ask if I had a minute. He stormed in and accused me of poisoning his boss against him. He said ever since the housewarming things had shifted. He said I had probably told stories, made little comments, turned people against him. He said I always needed to be the injured one. I let him talk longer than he deserved, because I was curious how far he would take the fantasy. Turns out, very far. When he finally paused, I asked one question. Did you come to your niece's birthday? He blinked like I'd changed languages. I asked again. Did you come? Did you call? Did you text? Did you send a card? Anything. He started saying that was different. I said no, actually it wasn't. It was exactly the same pattern. He wanted grace, support, family, and rescue on demand, while giving nothing back unless it cost him nothing socially. He said I was cruel. I said he was spoiled. He said I enjoyed seeing him struggle. I laughed right in his face, which wasn't my best moment, but also not my worst. I said if I enjoyed that, I'd never have helped him the first time. He switched tactics then, which is another family habit I know by heart. When anger stops working, pivot to guilt. He said I knew how hard things had been. He said his wife was under unbearable stress. He said losing the job could cost them the house if things spiraled. Then, and this was the part that finally cured something in me, he said I could fix this if I wanted to. I could call my client and smooth it over. Just talk to him. Just explain. Just get him another chance. As if I were a faucet he could turn on whenever his life got dry. I told him no. Not dramatic no. Not screaming no. Just the kind of flat, adult no that doesn't leave room for mishearing. I said I wasn't risking my credibility again for someone who erased my help when it benefited him and blamed me when consequences arrived. I said if he had spent half the energy owning his choices that he spent rewriting them, maybe he wouldn't be standing in my living room begging the person he claimed had ruined him. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. Maybe I had, emotionally speaking. Then he called me selfish. I almost admired the nerve. He kept pushing. That's the thing about people who've been rescued more than once. They start treating access like entitlement. My brother said family was supposed to show up even when things were ugly. I said family was also supposed to tell the truth when it mattered. He said I was punishing him over pride. I said no, I was stepping out of a cycle where his pride kept becoming my emergency. Then he did what I should have expected from the beginning. He brought up childhood. Said I always thought I was better than everyone because I was the responsible one. Said I liked having stories where he was the screw-up and I was the savior. Hearing that from him felt like swallowing broken glass, because if anyone had been assigned a role in our family, it was him as the protected one and me as the one who could handle more. I didn't choose that. I survived it. I told him that when we were kids, he got new shoes while I wore patched uniforms. He rolled his eyes like I was dragging out ancient trivia. I said that's exactly the point. It was never ancient to me because the pattern never stopped. He got defended, explained, softened. I got praised for being strong whenever somebody needed an excuse not to show up for me. My mother called me independent when what she meant was conveniently neglected. My father said I was mature when what he meant was easier to disappoint. He told me I was being dramatic because I'd done okay in life, as if making something out of scraps cancels the fact that all you were given was scraps. At that point, my daughter wandered into the hall because kids always appear at the exact wrong moment, like tiny emotional deer. She looked from me to him and asked if he was yelling. He changed his face instantly, softened his voice. Said no, sweetheart. Adults were just talking. Something inside me went solid then, because he could modulate for her. He could choose gentleness when he wanted to. He just hadn't chosen it for me in years. I told him it was time to leave. He said not until I agreed to call his former boss. I walked to the door and opened it. He stood there for a second, breathing hard, waiting for me to cave the way I always used to after tears or history or guilt. I didn't. Finally, he left, muttering that I would regret turning my back on him. I locked the door so fast I almost broke the chain. My mother called 20 minutes later, which told me he'd gone straight downstairs and started narrating. She said my brother was in crisis, and whatever our issues were, couldn't I be the bigger person? That phrase. The bigger person is always the one expected to choke quietly on other people's choices. I told her being the bigger person had already cost me money, time, sleep, respect, and now my daughter's peace. She said children shouldn't be kept from family over adult disagreements. I said then maybe adults shouldn't weaponize children by disappearing when they're angry at somebody else. My father got on the phone after that and said enough was enough, that I had become bitter and unforgiving. I said no, I'd become observant. He told me blood matters. I said then why didn't it matter when I was the one being humiliated for years? He had no answer except anger. My mother started crying in the background. Real crying, or maybe strategic crying, hard to tell with her. Suddenly I felt ancient, tired in the bones, like I could already see the next 10 years if I stayed available. Another crisis, another rescue request, another lie, another lecture about grace. So I said something I'd never said to either of my parents before. I said if their version of family required me to accept disrespect indefinitely, then they could keep that version without me. And then I hung up. My hand shook for an hour after, but the apartment felt oddly clear, like somebody had opened a window after years of burnt food and old smoke. The next week was all logistics and emotional whiplash. I blocked my brother first, not out of rage exactly, though rage was definitely present and wearing boots. I blocked him because I know how he argues. He circles, he reframes, he sends late-night paragraphs that turn your certainty into homework. I blocked my mother 2 days later after she left a voice message saying she'd forgive my outburst if I called my brother and apologized for escalating things at the housewarming. Forgive my outburst. As if we'd all just had a noisy brunch disagreement and not years of distortion with a side of disrespect. I left my father unblocked for another day out of some leftover daughterly superstition. Then he sent a message about how bitterness poisons a woman's home. Blocked. A few relatives kept reaching out privately. My aunt said she understood why I'd snapped, though she wished it hadn't happened at a party. My cousin said everybody knew my sister-in-law had a mouth on her, but people tolerated it because confronting her was exhausting. That sentence actually helped me. Not because it excused anything, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. I hadn't imagined the pattern. I had just been the one expected to absorb the cost of naming it. My daughter noticed the quiet almost immediately. Kids track absence like weather pressure. She asked why Grandpa hadn't called after she lost her second tooth. She asked whether her uncle still liked the drawing she made him of our family at the park, the one where she accidentally gave him green eyebrows because the marker slipped. I told her sometimes adults make bad choices when they feel ashamed, and it can take them a long time to do better. She asked if that meant we were mad forever. I said I didn't know about forever. I only knew I wasn't going to keep opening the door for people who walked in and wiped their feet on us. Work got busier, which helped. Busy is not healing, but it can at least keep you from rereading old text threads at 1 a.m. I booked a campaign for a chain of urgent care clinics, a batch of training modules for a roofing company, and a holiday radio spot so aggressively cheerful it made me want to chew drywall. Money wasn't amazing, but it was steady. I rearranged the second bedroom back into a proper studio and let my daughter help choose a new rug for the floor. She picked one with little suns on it. Said the room looked happier now. I didn't tell her it felt happier because it no longer smelled faintly like other people's crisis. The weirdest part was how grief kept sneaking in sideways. Not grief for the version of my brother who existed now. That man felt like a stranger in my hallway. I grieved the old one. The one who sat on my kitchen counter eating cereal out of the box and asking if a breakup text sounded too formal. The one who bought my daughter toy dinosaurs from gas stations because he couldn't resist her tiny, delighted face. Losing somebody who is still technically alive is obnoxious that way. There's no casserole for it. People just expect you to move on because nobody died, and meanwhile something absolutely did. A month after the job loss, I heard from my aunt that my brother and his wife were behind on their mortgage already and trying to blame the firing on family interference. I laughed until I got angry and then got quiet, because even from a distance, they were still using me as insulation. If bad things happened, I was the villain. If good things happened, I was erased. Convenient arrangement. Terrible relationship. So I stopped tracking them. Not instantly, not heroically, more like a recovering idiot. I'd think about checking. I'd feel that little itch. Then I'd remember my daughter checking the front door on her birthday, and the urge would die on its own. The holidays were rough in stupid little ways. Not movie scene rough. No sobbing in snow, no dramatic knocks at the door. Just small absences stacked on top of each other until they got heavy. I bought gifts for fewer people. My daughter asked fewer hopeful questions. The family group chat. which I could technically still see through my tablet because I hadn't logged out there yet, filled with photos I wasn't in. My parents at my brother's house. My mother holding a pie dish like she personally invented forgiveness. Somebody's caption about family being everything. I stared at that one long enough to give myself a headache. I almost replied. God, I almost replied. Something sharp and satisfying and impossible to take back. Instead, I logged out and handed my tablet to my daughter so she could watch a cartoon while I wrapped presents in the kitchen and muttered swear words into tape. Progress, honestly. Christmas morning in our apartment ended up being smaller and better than I expected. Pancakes from a box mix, mismatched pajamas, my daughter yelling over a secondhand dollhouse like we'd won the lottery. There was grief in it. Yes. There was also relief. Nobody judging the wrapping paper. Nobody correcting my parenting. Nobody making my home feel like a waiting room for approval. I kept noticing how calm I felt. And every time I noticed it, I got mad all over again that chaos had ever been normalized enough for calm to surprise me. A week later, I ran into my mother outside a pharmacy. 88. She looked older. That's not me being poetic. She literally looked older. More tired around the mouth. She froze when she saw me, then tried to smile with the carefulness of someone approaching a skittish animal. We stood there by the automatic doors with carts rattling past us and people carrying cough drops and toilet paper like life wasn't splitting quietly in public. She asked how my daughter was. I said she was fine. She asked how work was. I said busy. Then she sighed and said families shouldn't stay broken over pride. I asked whose pride. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said my brother was struggling, my sister-in-law was stressed, and my father hated the distance. I said my daughter hated it too, especially on her birthday, but nobody seemed too troubled then. My mother flinched, which at least told me the point landed somewhere. She said I had to understand how hard it was for my brother to feel judged. I actually laughed, which was maybe rude in front of the vitamin display. But come on. I said he wasn't allergic to judgment. He was allergic to being the one who got it. Then she cried. Real tears this time, I think. She said she missed me. And there it was, the part that almost got me, because I missed having a mother too. Not the one I actually had, maybe, but the imaginary upgraded edition in my head. The one who would have protected me when people spoke to me with contempt. The one who would have shown up for my little girl because children are not bargaining chips. I stood there wanting to comfort her and wanting to scream, which is a very daughter feeling. I told her missing me wasn't the same as repairing what she helped damage. She asked what I wanted from her. That's when I knew nothing had changed. Because if she didn't know by then, after all of it, then any answer I gave would just become another hoop for me to jump through. So I said I wanted space. Consistent space. Not a dramatic reunion, not a forced holiday dinner, not a speech about unity. Just distance long enough for me to stop bracing every time my phone lit up. She nodded like she'd been handed something cruel. Maybe to her she had. Then she said she loved me. I said okay. Not because I didn't believe it at all, but because love without protection had stopped meaning very much to me. I drove home shaking anyway. Spring came without permission the way it always does. All sudden pollen and school forms and the feeling that life has moved on while you're still arguing with old ghosts. My daughter got taller. I got better at saying no without an essay attached. That alone probably saved me several years of stress-related skin issues. Then my aunt called and said my brother wanted to send over some birthday money for my daughter. Months late. Through her. Not to see her. Not to apologize. Just money. Like he was paying off a parking ticket and hoping the clerk would stamp the file closed. I said no. My aunt, who genuinely meant well, said maybe it was his awkward way of trying. I said trying would look like accountability, not an envelope with folded bills and no explanation. She went quiet and then, because she knows me, admitted I was probably right. That night, I thought about him longer than I wanted to. I thought about how easy it would have been to tell myself the money meant something good. Progress. Remorse. Softening. But I know my brother. Money would have let him feel generous without ever saying the words that mattered. I excluded you. I lied about you. I let my wife disrespect you. I let my niece pay for anger that wasn't hers. Without those words, cash was just another shortcut around discomfort. So I said no to the money and yes to my own peace, and I wish I could claim it felt noble. Mostly it felt sad. My daughter asked why we were donating some old toys that weekend, and I told her, because homes work better when they aren't stuffed with things nobody uses. Halfway through the sentence, I realized I wasn't talking only about toys. By early summer, the silence had become a routine instead of an emergency. That was new. I stopped checking shared family updates through other people. I stopped rehearsing future confrontations in the shower. My daughter stopped asking whether her uncle might come by one day, maybe. Kids are resilient, which is another beautiful sentence people use to hide how often children have to adapt to grown people's failures. She still drew our family and school projects, but now it was mostly me, her, and occasionally the neighbor's dog if he'd been around that week. Work got better too. Not magically, not overnight, but steadily. I raised my rates with 2 long-term clients, and nobody died. I redid my demo reel. I bought a better microphone after months of talking myself out of it. One evening, after finishing a batch of corporate narration that made me want to fling myself into traffic, I stood in the doorway of my little studio and felt proud in a clean way I hadn't in a while. Not because anybody approved, not because I'd won some moral contest, just because this life, the one people kept treating as flimsy, had held. It held through bills, through single motherhood, through freelancing, through family mess, through other people's collapse, through my own stupidity in thinking love automatically made people decent. I didn't become softer about what happened, I became clearer. That's different. Clear enough to know that if somebody only values your help when it's private and resents it when it's true, they don't want relationship. They want access. At the end of summer, I got one last message from an unknown number while I was waiting in the school pickup line. It was my brother. Short, no drama. He said he knew I had blocked him. He said he was using a borrowed phone because he wanted to say he was sorry for how things got out of hand and that maybe someday we could start over. How things got out of hand. I stared at that sentence while minivans crawled forward and somebody behind me tapped their horn because I hadn't moved fast enough. I could have answered. I could have asked what exactly he meant. I could have dragged out a confession 1 teaspoon at a time. Years ago, I would have. I would have taken that crumb and baked a whole fantasy out of it. But sitting there with construction paper on the passenger seat and my daughter's backpack waiting to be tossed in the back, I realized I didn't want another conversation built out of half-ownership and convenient vagueness. So I wrote back one line. I said starting over only works when people are honest about where they ended. Then I blocked that number too. Maybe that sounds harsh, maybe it was. I don't really care anymore. Some endings aren't dramatic. They don't come with courtroom speeches or family revelations or a satisfying slow clap from the universe. Sometimes it's just a woman in a pickup line deciding she is done carrying everybody else's version of events on top of her own groceries, deadlines, parenting, and nerves. Sometimes it's realizing that love can be real and still not be enough to keep somebody close. Sometimes the cleanest thing you can do is stop volunteering to be the bridge people use while complaining about the view. I picked up my daughter a minute later. She climbed into the car talking a mile a minute about recess drama and a class pet that smelled weird, and whether we could have breakfast for dinner. I said yes, absolutely. Breakfast for dinner sounded perfect. Then I drove us home to our loud little apartment, to the studio with the sun rug, to the life that kept being called unstable by people who couldn't even hold on to their own stories without my help. And for once, instead of replaying what I should have said or done or forgiven, I just listened to her talk and took the next turn when it came. My sister spent everything on her wedding and then said I ruined her life because I didn't stop her. My wedding dress smelled like cheap steamed fabric and panic, and I kept tugging at the sleeves like I could pull myself back into my normal life if I tried hard enough. Delaney, that's me, standing in a rented hall with folding chairs and a buffet my parents paid for, telling myself simple didn't mean sad. It didn't mean sad. It meant we weren't going to start a marriage by setting money on fire. That was the whole point. My husband squeezed my hand and whispered, "We did it," like we'd survived something together. I smiled because I meant it, and because the photographer kept hovering like a hungry bird. The ceremony was small on purpose. A few friends, a few family members, and the kind of decorations you can store in a closet later without feeling stupid. I wore a dress that cost less than what my sister spent on her hair every month. Okay, I might be exaggerating a tiny bit, but only because her hair always looked like it belonged on someone with a trust fund. My parents covered the food and the little religious ceremony piece, and my husband and I paid for everything else. I was proud of us. I was also so busy being proud that I didn't notice my sister rolling her eyes at my centerpieces. I found out later because people can't keep anything to themselves. A cousin pulled me aside a week after the wedding and said, "I didn't want to tell you," but she was being kind of loud. Then my aunt, the one who treats gossip like it's oxygen, told me my sister had been making jokes about my budget wedding. Apparently, she'd pointed at the dessert table and said, "So this is what being responsible looks like," with that fake smile people use when they're trying to cut you without leaving a mark. I should have confronted her right away. No, I shouldn't have, I know, but I wanted to. I had fantasies of grabbing the microphone and doing a whole dramatic speech like I was in a reality show. Instead, I did what I always do when I'm cornered. I swallowed it, told myself she was jealous, and went back to building my little newlywed life. Here's the thing my parents never said out loud, but everyone in our family knew. They'd kept a savings account for each of us since we were kids. Not some magical pile of money, just a steady, careful little fund they added to when they could. My parents weren't rich. They were the kind of we plan ahead people. My mother used coupons like it was a sport. My father would fix something himself before he'd pay someone else. They saved for our future like it was a promise. Before the wedding, my parents sat me down and said, "Use what you need. The rest can stay there for a house or an emergency." I used a small chunk because, again, we didn't want to start our marriage by setting money on fire. And they kept the rest, which felt normal because they'd been holding that money for years. And I trusted them. My sister sat at my wedding like she was watching someone else's boring movie. I didn't see it then. I see it now, though, like a little warning light. She didn't clap that hard. She didn't cry. She didn't whisper, "You look beautiful." She looked around like she was taking notes on what not to do. Afterward, she posted one vague photo on a social media app with a caption that said something like Family Day. No congratulations. No tag, nothing. Yes, it bothered me. Yes, I pretended it didn't. A few days later, my aunt told my sister with the energy of someone lighting a match near gasoline that I barely touched my savings money. I didn't even know she'd said it. I wasn't there, but it traveled like everything does in our family, fast, twisted, and with extra seasoning. My sister heard that and somehow turned it into, they didn't give her any money at all, like my parents had just ignored me, skipped my wedding, and tossed me into the street. It made no sense. But my sister has this special talent where she believes whatever story makes her the victim. She clung to that version like it was a life raft, and nobody corrected her because nobody wanted the drama, including me, which, yes, I regret. 6 months after my wedding, my sister had hers. And when I say hers was big, I mean it was the kind of wedding where you walk in and immediately know someone's credit card is crying. She picked a venue that looked like a fancy building from the outside and a money pit from the inside. There were lights. There was a dessert table that could have fed a small town. There were party favors that I'm sure got thrown away by half the guests before they even got home. My sister wore a dress that looked like it weighed more than her personality, which, trust me, is saying something. My parents paid for it. They used the entire savings meant for her. Every bit. They did it because they love her, and because she had been talking about her dream wedding since she was a teenager. I watched my mother smile through stress. I watched my father do that tight jaw thing he does when he's trying not to think about numbers. I told myself it wasn't my business. I also told myself it wasn't my problem, which was technically true. Emotionally, it was like watching someone you love walk into a wall. Her husband didn't contribute. Not because he couldn't, necessarily, but because he wouldn't. He'd bounced between jobs like he was allergic to staying put. He'd get hired, complain about the schedule, complain about the manager, complain about the customers, and then he'd be gone. Sometimes he got fired, sometimes he quit, and every time he acted like the world was the one failing him. At the wedding, he made a speech about how he was going to build something. He said it like a promise. He also said it like my sister owed him applause for having the thought. People clapped because people clap when they're trapped in a room with cake. I clapped too because I'm not a monster, but I remember thinking, build what? Spoiler, he built nothing at all. After they got married, my sister tried to run her own little business making bags and shoes. I'm not going to say it was bad because that sounds mean, and honestly, she did put effort into it. But the quality didn't match the price. The photos were cute. The product was not. She'd brag about being an entrepreneur like that automatically meant money would fall into her lap. Meanwhile, she was barely selling anything, and her husband was at home playing online games and streaming, which basically meant he sat on the couch and talked to a handful of strangers while my sister worked her job, cooked, cleaned, and tried to keep the lights on. When I visited, the apartment always smelled like stale snacks and defeat. His gaming setup took up more space than their dining table. I'd step over cords like I was navigating a trap. My sister would greet me with this tight smile, and then she'd start complaining the second her husband wasn't listening. "He's just stressed," she'd say. "He's working on something." I'd look at her and want to shake her. I didn't. I smiled, because apparently my personality is avoidance. He never lifted a finger around the house. If there were dishes in the sink, he walked past them. If the trash was full, he pushed it down. If my sister asked him to help, He'd sigh like she'd asked him to move a mountain, and then he'd slide in little comments, like tiny drops of poison. "Your parents don't respect me," he'd say. "They think I'm beneath them." Or, "Your sister always gets the good stuff. They help her and leave you to struggle." He'd say it like he was protecting her, like he was the only one who saw the truth. My sister ate it up. Every time my parents tried to give her advice, she took it as an attack. If my mother said, "Maybe you should put some money aside," my sister heard, "You're failing." If my father said, "He needs to get a job," my sister heard, "We hate your husband." She'd defend him like he was a wounded animal, and he'd sit there smug and quiet, letting her do it. A year and a half after her wedding, I got pregnant. Not planned exactly, but not a shock either. My husband and I had been doing the whole, "if it happens thing, which is basically a fancy way of saying we weren't trying that hard to prevent it. When I saw the test, my hands shook. I laughed and cried at the same time in the bathroom like a cliche. Then I sat on the floor and stared at the wall for a long time because suddenly everything felt huge. Also because I was scared. I don't talk about that part enough. People act like pregnancy automatically turns you into a glowing goddess. It doesn't. Sometimes it turns you into a nervous raccoon. Around that same time, my husband got a promotion. Nothing glamorous, but it meant more responsibility and better pay. It also meant he'd be working at another location on the other side of town, closer to neighborhoods with better schools and less of that constant siren noise. We'd been renting for years, and we'd always said we'd buy when it made sense. Suddenly, it made sense. So I called my parents and asked about the rest of my savings money. Not because we couldn't do it without it, but because the truth is, buying a house in this country feels like trying to climb a wall coated in oil. Every little bit helps. My parents were happy. My mother cried. My father started talking about interest rates like he was about to run for office. They transferred the money, and with that plus our own savings, we put a down payment on a house in a good area. We signed the papers. We got the keys. I stood in the empty living room and pressed my palm against the wall like I needed to prove it was real. We posted about it on a social media app, because that's what people do, and because I was excited and I wanted my friends to know. I also posted about the pregnancy because I was excited and I wanted to feel normal about it. 2 announcements one day, like I was competing for attention. I wasn't. I just wanted to share. But my sister absolutely took it like a personal insult. Within an hour, my phone lit up like it was on fire. My sister called. I answered because I'm stupid. Her voice was sharp, already loud, already angry. "So you had money the whole time," she said. Not, "Congrats." Not, "I'm happy for you." Just accusation, right out of the gate. I blinked and said, "What are you talking about?" "The savings," she snapped. "You act like you're so responsible. But you just got handed money and didn't tell me. You let me think." She cut herself off like she'd almost admitted something. Then she barreled forward. "You let me look stupid. You let everyone think I blew all my money while you were secretly sitting on yours." I said, "I didn't let you think anything. Nobody stopped you from saving." That's when she lost it. She started yelling about how I should have warned her. Like I was supposed to call her and say, "Hey, just in case you're about to spend every cent on a wedding, maybe don't." She said I had an obligation to guide her, to advise her, to save her from herself. Her husband yelled in the background, something about favoritism and how my parents always coddled me. I could hear him like a barking dog. It made my skin crawl. I tried to explain, but she wasn't listening. She was rewriting history in real time. She said my parents never gave me money for my wedding, like I'd been some neglected orphan. She said I kept my savings secret on purpose so she'd waste hers and fail. She said I enjoyed watching her struggle. She said so many things so fast that I couldn't even grab one to argue with. It was like trying to hold water in my hands. Finally, I said, "I'm not doing this." And I hung up. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. I stared at my phone like it had betrayed me. It kind of did. But also, it was just a phone. The betrayal was a family specialty. The messages started immediately. Long paragraphs, short insults, a mix of both. She called me fake. She called me selfish. She called me a liar. She said I was playing innocent. She demanded an apology for making her look dumb. I didn't even know what she wanted me to apologize for. For existing? For not being her financial babysitter? I blocked her. Then she started using other numbers, friends, random apps that let you generate a different number. It was like she had turned harassing me into a hobby. I'd be at work, trying to focus on spreadsheets, and my phone would buzz with a new message that made my stomach drop. I'd be lying in bed next to my husband, trying to sleep, and I'd see my screen light up, and I'd feel my whole body tense. After a few days, I snapped. I sent one message back that was too harsh. I told her she wasn't welcome in my life if she kept acting like this. I told her she wasn't going to have access to my kid if she couldn't treat me like a human being. I regret the wording, not the boundary. The boundary needed to happen. The wording was a mess. I was a mess. She took that message and ran with it. Suddenly, she was the victim again. She told people I was threatening to keep her nephew away. She said I was weaponizing my pregnancy. She said I was cruel. She said I was punishing her for being honest. Meanwhile, she kept texting me, calling me names, accusing me of sabotaging her life. The hypocrisy could have been funny if it wasn't making me cry in my car after work. Eventually, I told my parents. I didn't want to. I felt like a tattletale. I felt childish. But I also felt like I was carrying a tiny human inside me, and I couldn't keep taking emotional punches like it was normal. My mother tried to minimize it at first. She said, "She's just stressed." She said, "You know how she gets." She said, "Don't take it personally." I wanted to scream, "How do I not take it personally when she's literally attacking me?" My father, on the other hand, got angry. He didn't do the soft thing. He did the, "I'm calling her right now" thing. They confronted her. My sister denied it at first. Then, when my father started reading her messages out loud, she got quiet. Then she got defensive. Then she got furious. She said it was between sisters and my parents had no right to interfere. My father said, "When one sister is harassing the other, it becomes my business." My mother tried to smooth it over. My father didn't let her. He told my sister she was acting entitled and ridiculous. He told her her financial issues were her responsibility. He told her she didn't get to blame me for her choices. My sister exploded. She accused them of hating her husband. She accused them of wanting her to marry someone rich. She said they'd always favored me. My parents pointed out that my husband wasn't rich. He just worked, and that the difference wasn't money, it was effort. My sister didn't want to hear that. She suddenly said she never should have accepted the savings money at all, that my parents used money to control her, like she was a trained animal, like they'd been pulling strings this whole time. It was honestly breathtaking. I sat there listening to the aftermath and thinking, how did we grow up in the same house? After that call, she went quiet for a couple of weeks. Not peaceful quiet, the kind where you can feel someone plotting. I started to relax a little. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I started letting myself enjoy being pregnant, at least in small moments, like when my husband rested his hand on my stomach and smiled like he couldn't believe it either. Then 3 weeks later, we decided to do a combined little housewarming and pregnancy celebration. Not a huge party, just some close friends and family. We wanted to show people the house. We wanted to eat food and pretend life was normal. We didn't invite my sister. That felt obvious. My parents came. My mother kept glancing at me like she was waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. Someone posted pictures on a social media app, of course, and my sister saw them. That evening, she threw her own party. Same day, same time. She posted photos with captions about real family and people who actually show up. She sent some of the photos directly to my mother. It was like she was daring my mother to pick a side. My mother cried. My father got angry. I got tired, like bone-deep tired. The kind where you want to lie on the floor and let the world spin without you. My father, in one of his righteous moods, texted my sister from his own phone and said if she hated the savings money so much, she could start paying it back. He threw out a number that made me choke when my mother told me, more than $100,000 over the years between her education and her wedding. My mother immediately tried to correct him, like, "It's not exactly that." My father said, "It's close enough." My sister didn't answer right away, which, honestly, scared me more than her yelling. Silence means she's crafting a story. A few days later, she started posting again. Sometimes it was vague quotes about betrayal. Sometimes it was pointed jabs about favoritism. Sometimes it was performative pain about being kept from family. My aunt would forward me screenshots like she was delivering evidence. Distant relatives would message asking if everything was okay. I stopped explaining. I stopped even reading them. I just kept living. At my own gathering, a cousin said, "I saw something. Is everything fine?" In front of a couple other people, like it was casual, like my family drama was a cute topic at a party. I smiled through it. I lied through it. I said, "Oh, she's just stressed." Meanwhile, inside, I felt like I was being peeled open. I spent that night crying in the shower so my husband wouldn't hear me. Then I cried again in bed anyway because he noticed. He said, "I'm not letting her poison this." And I knew what he meant. He wasn't going to let my sister turn my pregnancy into a battlefield. The stress started messing with me. I stopped sleeping. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning and scroll through her posts like I was punishing myself. I'd read the comments. I'd look at who liked them. I'd feel my throat tighten. I'd feel my hands go cold. I'd say, I'm done. And then I'd look again 10 minutes later. Yes, I know, it was unhealthy. It also felt impossible to stop, like if I didn't watch it, it would somehow get worse. My mother called me crying one afternoon and asked me to be the bigger person. She said, she's your sister. She said, maybe you can just talk to her. I said, talk to her about what? Her fantasy that I ruined her life by buying a house? My mother said, she's hurt. I said, so am I. My voice cracked, and then I got angry, because I hate crying when I'm trying to be firm. It feels like losing. I told my mother I wasn't apologizing for something I didn't do. I told her my sister wasn't meeting the baby until she stopped acting like I was her enemy. My mother got quiet. She didn't agree. She didn't fight. She just sounded sad, which somehow made me feel worse. Like I was the one causing pain, even though my sister was the one throwing knives. A few weeks later, my sister showed up at my parents' place unannounced. She demanded a conversation. She was furious about my father demanding she repay the money. She said it was proof they were controlling her. She said they wouldn't ask me to repay anything, so obviously they favored me. My parents tried to explain, calmly, that we both got the same amount, we just used it differently. That was the truth. I used a portion and saved the rest. She used every bit. That's not favoritism. That's choices. My sister screamed anyway. She talked about a lifetime of being second. She listed every little grievance she could dig up. Even stuff from when we were kids, like the time I got a new backpack and she didn't. She forgot the part where hers was new the year before. Details never mattered when she was in victim mode. My father kept saying, you made your choices. My mother kept saying, please don't yell. My sister kept yelling. At some point, she said, fine, I'll pay it back, every cent. And when I pay the last penny, I'm done. I'm never speaking to you again. She said it like it was a threat, like my parents would collapse from grief. My father said, that's your choice. That made her even angrier. She started sending payments, irregular and dramatic. The first few months, she paid the same amount, right on time, like she was proving a point. Then the payments got smaller, then they got late. Then she skipped one and sent a long message blaming my parents for her stress. Then her husband messaged my father, accusing him of financial abuse. Financial abuse. After a few more sporadic payments, she stopped entirely. My father sent one final message. Consider the debt forgiven, but the boundary stays. My sister never acknowledged it. My mother wanted closure, but my father refused. We're done chasing, he said. The audacity would have been impressive if it wasn't so exhausting. In the middle of all this, I was still pregnant. Life didn't pause. I still worked. I still went to appointments. I still tried to eat vegetables. I still had days where I felt excited and days where I felt like I'd made a huge mistake bringing a child into this mess. My husband tried to shield me, but he also had his own limit. One night, after I'd spent an hour crying because my sister posted another vague betrayal caption, he said, if she shows up here, I'm calling the police. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a boundary, like, we're not doing this. I didn't want it to come to that. I didn't want police involved. I didn't want court. I didn't want any of the big, scary things that make family drama feel like it's crossing into something else. I wanted it to stay in that miserable, normal zone of, we're fighting and it sucks. But I also didn't want my sister showing up and screaming at my door when I was 8 months pregnant. So when she started threatening to show up and say what she had to say, my husband and I went to the local police station and asked what we could do. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some movie scene. It was me sitting in a plastic chair, holding a folder of screenshots, feeling like the world's biggest loser. The officer told us we could file a report about harassment and we could request a no-contact order if it escalated. He looked tired. He looked like he'd seen this exact thing 1,000 times. It made me feel both comforted and devastated. Comforted because we weren't crazy. We didn't file anything that day. I wasn't ready. I kept hoping it would burn out on its own. My sister wasn't physically hurting me. She was just poisoning everything. And my family kept acting like emotional poisoning was something I should tolerate because that's how she is. The baby came in a blur of exhaustion and relief. The labor was long. I cursed. I cried. I made a joke at one point about how I was never doing this again, and my husband laughed and then immediately apologized because laughing felt wrong in the moment. When they handed me my baby, I felt like my whole body reset. Like the world narrowed down to this tiny person, and everything else became background noise. For a few days, I didn't think about my sister. I didn't check my phone. I didn't care what she was posting. I was too busy learning how to survive on no sleep and snack crumbs. My parents came to meet the baby. My mother cried again. My father looked like he was trying not to cry and failing. It was sweet. It was normal. It almost made me forget. Then my cousin messaged me and said my sister had posted something about being kept away from family. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. People aren't stupid. She said something about watching someone take everything and still act like the victim. I felt that cold rush again, like my body recognized danger. My husband took my phone, read the message, and set it down. He said, "She's not coming near this baby until she stops." He said it so calmly that it made me cry again, because I realized how much I needed someone to be calm when I couldn't. A couple weeks later, my sister's husband left. I didn't hear it from her. Of course I didn't. I heard it from my aunt, because my aunt can smell drama like a shark smells blood. She called me and said, "Well, guess what happened?" Like she was sharing a fun story. I said, "I'm holding a newborn, can you not?" She ignored me. She said my sister's husband had moved on and my sister was finally waking up. She said my sister was devastated. Not because she missed him as a person, but because she still kept insisting he was just taking space and coming back. My aunt said my sister felt betrayed anyway, like he'd promised her a different ending. I almost laughed. Almost. Because how many times had my sister betrayed other people emotionally and called it honesty? My sister got a part-time job. Her business had quietly died months before. Another dream abandoned when reality demanded actual work. She stopped paying my parents back. She sent them another long message, blaming them for everything. My parents were tired. They were worn down. My mother started talking about how she just wanted peace. My father started talking about how he was done being manipulated. They disagreed, gently, but it was there. The crack. My sister didn't reach out to me directly. Instead, she told a cousin, "Tell her I don't need to know that baby." Like it was her choice. Like she was rejecting us, not the other way around. The cousin told me awkwardly, like she was delivering a package. I felt this weird mix of relief and grief. Relief because I didn't want her near my child. Grief because, deep down, some part of me still wanted my sister to just be normal for once. The months passed. The baby grew. My body healed. My husband and I settled into that messy new parent routine where you forget what day it is and you celebrate tiny wins like the baby slept 3 hours. My sister kept posting. Sometimes it was vague. Sometimes it was pointed. She'd say things about being excluded and people who think they're better. It was like she needed a stage even when the audience was exhausted. My mother tried to push reconciliation again when the baby was a few months old. She said, "What if you just let her see the baby once, supervised, at our house?" I stared at her and said, "Why is the solution always me giving her what she wants?" My mother looked offended. Then she looked sad. Then she looked guilty. I softened, because I'm still me. I said, "I'm not punishing her. I'm protecting my kid." My mother whispered, "I know." But she didn't act like she knew. She kept hoping my sister would become someone else. One night, after the baby finally fell asleep, I sat on the couch with my husband and told him the truth I'd been avoiding. I didn't think my sister was ever going to admit she was wrong. I didn't think she was ever going to stop being resentful. She might calm down. She might move on. But she would always carry this story where I was the villain. And maybe that was fine. Maybe I didn't need her approval. Maybe I didn't need to keep bleeding for a relationship that only existed when I was willing to be the punching bag. A year after the baby was born, my sister showed up at my parents' house again. This time she didn't scream. This time she cried. My mother called me after and said, "She's finally accepting he's not coming back." I said, "Good. He left months ago." My mother said, "Yes, but she kept saying he was just taking space. Now she's admitting it's over." I could hear the hope in her voice. It made my stomach twist. My sister told my parents she wanted to start over. My father said, "With what? Reality?" My mother shushed him. My sister said she'd been manipulated. She said she'd been stressed. She said she'd been in a dark place. She didn't say, "I was wrong." She didn't say, "I hurt you." She didn't say my name. She talked around it like she was allergic to accountability. Still, my mother wanted to believe it. My father stayed guarded. A week later, my sister messaged me for the first time since the baby was born. The message was short, which is how I knew it wasn't sincere. It said, "Can we talk?" No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a request. like I owed her access to my life. I stared at it for a long time. I felt anger. I felt sadness. I felt this tired, hollow thing. I also felt something else. Clarity. I typed back, "Not right now." Then I turned my phone off. Yes, I turned it off. It worked. She didn't take that well. She started sending messages again, not as intense as before, but still full of little digs. Must be nice to be perfect. Must be nice to have everything. The old script. I didn't respond. I let the silence do the work. Eventually, my father asked me to come over without the baby. He said he wanted to talk, just us. When I got there, my sister was there too. My mother had set it up. Of course she had. I wanted to leave. My father gave me a look that said, "Stay." So I stayed. And yes, I was furious. I'm still furious thinking about it. My sister started crying immediately. She said she felt abandoned. She said she felt betrayed. She said she'd been trying. I waited. I waited for the part where she would say she was sorry. She never did. Instead, she said, "You could have told me." Again, that phrase. Like I'd hidden some treasure map from her. I finally snapped. Not screaming. Not throwing things, just snapping in that quiet way where your voice goes flat and you realize you don't care how you sound anymore. I said, "I didn't owe you a warning. I didn't owe you a lesson. You're not my child. You're my sister." She flinched like I'd slapped her. My mother started to cry. My father stared at my sister like he was seeing her for the first time. My sister said, "So you think you're better than me?" I said, "No. I think I'm tired of being your excuse." The room went silent. Even my mother stopped making noise for a second. My sister looked stunned. Then she got angry. Because anger is her comfort zone. She said I was cold. She said I was cruel. She said I was punishing her. She said I was keeping her from family. My father told her to stop. My sister turned on him, accusing him of loving me more. My father said, "I love you both. I'm just not willing to lie anymore." That was the closest we ever got to honesty in our family. After that meeting, things didn't magically fix themselves. My sister didn't transform into a reasonable person. My mother didn't stop hoping. My father didn't stop being tired. But something shifted in me. I stopped feeling like I had to explain myself to every relative who saw a vague post. I stopped chasing the idea of a sister who would clap at my happiness without feeling personally attacked. My sister kept her distance for a while. She told people she was taking space. She told them I was dramatic. She told them she was protecting her peace. I let her. Because honestly, if she wanted peace, she could have it. Far away from me. By my kid's second birthday, I ran into my sister at a grocery store. Not a cute movie moment. Not slow motion. Just me pushing a cart with a tired toddler and her standing near the frozen foods, staring at me like she wasn't sure if she should speak. My kid waved at her, because my kid waves at everybody. My sister's face did something complicated. She lifted her hand halfway like she might wave back, then dropped it. I didn't approach her. I didn't do a speech. I didn't do a dramatic stare down. I just nodded once and kept walking. My heart was pounding, but my body kept moving. It felt like choosing myself in real time. It also felt like grief. Both can exist. Don't let anyone tell you they can't. Later that night, my mother called and said, "Did you see her today?" I said, "Yes." My mother said, "Did you talk?" I said, "No." My mother sounded disappointed. I said, "Mom, I'm not doing the cycle anymore." My mother sighed like she wanted to argue. Then she said quietly, "I understand." I don't know if she did, but it was the first time she didn't push. My sister never held my child. She saw my kid exactly once at that disastrous dinner, but she never got close. Not then. Not after. She tells people she was kept away. She posts about family betrayal sometimes when she's having a rough week. My aunt still forwards me screenshots like she's doing me a service. I've learned to mute people and let some relationships fade. My parents are still my parents. My mother still aches for a picture-perfect family that doesn't exist. My father still gets angry when he thinks about how much energy my sister stole from all of us. I still feel flashes of sadness when I see sisters laughing together in a coffee shop. Like it's the most normal thing in the world. I still have moments where I wonder if I could have done something different. Then I remember the truth. She wanted a villain. If it wasn't me, it would have been someone else. And when I tuck my kid into bed and listen to that soft little breathing, I feel this stubborn, quiet certainty that I did the right thing. Not the easy thing. Not the keep everyone happy thing. The right thing. The thing that let my home stay a home, not a stage for someone else's resentment. Not long after that grocery store run-in, my sister pulled a move that still makes my jaw clench when I think about it. My mother called me and said, in that too bright voice she uses when she's trying to sell me on something, "We're doing a little dinner this weekend. Just us. Your father, me, you, the baby." And then she paused, like she was waiting for me to fill in the missing piece. I said, "Okay." She said, "And your sister is coming too." I swear my whole body went cold. I said, "No." My mother immediately started with the soft guilt. "She's been lonely," she said. "She's not with him anymore," she said. "She just wants to see you," she said. She didn't say the baby out loud, but it was hovering in the air like a perfume. I said, "I already told you the rule. No apology, no access." My mother said, "She'll behave." I said, "That's not an apology." My mother said, "Can you just try for me?" And here's the ugly truth. I did. Not because I believed it would end well, but because I was exhausted from being the villain in her story, and I wanted to stop feeling like I was making my mother suffer. Yes, I know, I caved. You can judge me. I judge me. So I showed up at my parents' house with my kid and a knot in my stomach. My father looked nervous. My mother looked hopeful. My sister walked in 10 minutes late like she was arriving at an event she was doing us a favor by attending. She didn't even look at me at first. She went straight to my kid with this sugary voice and said, "Hi, sweetie," like we were best friends and nothing had happened. I stepped between them. Not dramatic, not pushing, just stepping. I said, "Hi." She finally looked at me. Her eyes flicked over my face like she was scanning for weakness. Then she smiled and said, "So you're still mad?" I said, "You still haven't apologized." She laughed. Actually laughed. "For what?" she said. "For being honest? For getting upset when I got treated like garbage?" My father cleared his throat and said her name like a warning. My mother said, "Let's just have dinner." My sister rolled her eyes and said, "Fine, I'm not here to fight." Then she reached toward my kid again. I said, "Don't." She froze, like she couldn't believe I'd said it out loud in front of our parents. "Seriously?" she snapped. "You're still doing this?" I said, "You can meet the baby when you can talk to me without acting like I robbed you." My sister's face changed fast. That smile disappeared. Her voice got sharper. "You did rob me," she said. "You robbed me of the chance to do things the right way. You kept your little secret and watched me drown." I felt my hands start to shake. I said, "I didn't keep anything secret. You never asked. You assumed." She took a step closer, like she was trying to intimidate me in my parents' kitchen. "You're always the good one," she said, loud enough that my kid flinched. "You always get to be the good one, and I'm always the screw-up. You like that." I wish I could say I handled it with dignity. I didn't. I snapped back. "I like being left alone. That's what I like. I like not being blamed for your choices." My mother gasped like I'd cursed. My father's jaw tightened. My sister started crying instantly, like a switch flipped, and she turned to my mother and said, "See? She hates me." Then she pointed at my kid like that tiny person was a prop, and she's using the baby to punish me. I wanted to scream. Instead, I did this quiet, shaking laugh and said, "You are exhausting." And I hate that I said it because it was mean. It was also true. My father stepped in between us and said, "Enough." My sister tried to keep going, but my father cut her off and told her to leave. She stared at him like he'd slapped her. Then she started yelling at him too, calling him unfair, calling him cold, calling him exactly what her ex used to call him in those messages. My mother begged her to calm down. My sister grabbed her coat and stormed out, and right before she slammed the door, she shouted, "Enjoy your perfect little life." My kid started crying. My mother started crying. I stood there holding my kid and thinking, this is the dinner she promised would be peaceful. Spoiler, there was no dinner. On the drive home, my husband kept one hand on the steering wheel and one hand on my knee, like he was anchoring me. He didn't even ask what happened because he already knew. He said, "We're not doing that again." I nodded, even though my chest hurt like I'd swallowed glass. The next day, my mother sent me a long message about how everyone is hurting and families make mistakes, and we need to heal. My father sent a shorter message that said, "You did the right thing." I stared at both messages for a long time. It felt like choosing between them even though it shouldn't have. I wrote back to my mother, "I'm not healing by letting her keep cutting me." My mother didn't respond for hours. When she did, she just sent a heart. A heart. Like I was a distant friend and not her daughter. After that, my sister escalated in a more sneaky way. She stopped the obvious screaming and started playing the concerned victim. She messaged relatives and told them she was worried about me. She told them I was isolating myself. She told them my husband was controlling. Because obviously, If a woman sets a boundary, a man must be behind it. That's how my sister's brain works. Suddenly, I had cousins texting me like, "Are you okay?" and "just checking in," and "we're here if you need anything." I wanted to ask, were you here when she was harassing me for months? But I didn't. Because I'm still allergic to conflict, apparently. It got worse when my sister started showing up in places where she knew I'd be. Not every day. Not like a stalker movie. Just enough to make me tense. Once she appeared in the parking lot of my work right as I was leaving. I saw her leaning against her car like she was in a dramatic photo shoot. My stomach dropped. I locked my doors and sat there, watching her in the mirror, waiting for her to leave. She didn't. She walked up to my car and tapped on the window. I didn't roll it down. I cracked it like an inch because I'm not an idiot. She leaned in and smiled, fake sweet. "I just want to talk," she said. I said, "Not here." She said, "Then where?" I said, "Not at all." She laughed, like I was being cute. Then she said, "Quiet. You can't keep hiding forever." I felt my throat tighten. I said, "If you keep showing up like this, I'm going to file a report." Her smile slipped. She said, "Wow," like I was threatening to call the army. Then she backed away and raised her hands in this dramatic surrender. "Fine," she said. "I'll leave you alone." She walked back to her car and drove off, and I sat there shaking like I'd just run a mile. That night, my husband and I sat at the kitchen table and made a boring adult plan. If she showed up again, we were documenting it. If she contacted my workplace, we were documenting it. If she tried to come to our house, we were calling the police. Not to be dramatic, not to punish her, just to make it clear. We weren't playing games. A week later, she tried a different angle. Money. My mother called and said my sister was struggling and needed help. I said, "Help how?" My mother said, "Just a loan. Something small." I asked how small. My mother gave a number that made me laugh because it wasn't small. It was, "I can't pay my rent and also I want to keep living like I'm not broke." Small. My mother said, "She'll pay it back." I said, "Like she paid you back?" My mother went silent. My father called me later and said my mother had asked him too, and he'd said no. He sounded tired, like his whole body had become one long sigh. He said, "She's looking for someone to rescue her again." I said, "I'm not doing it." My father said, "Good." Then he added quieter, "Your mother is going to try anyway." And of course he was right. My mother kept bringing it up. "It's just one time," she said. "She's your sister," she said. "You're doing well," she said. I wanted to scream. I'm doing well because I'm not giving away my stability every time someone throws a tantrum. But instead I said, "I have a baby. I have a mortgage. I have bills. I'm not a bank." My mother cried and said, "So you're going to let her fail?" And that sentence hit me like a slap, because it was exactly the emotional trap my sister had been setting for years. If I don't save her, I'm cruel. If I do save her, she learns nothing and I keep bleeding. I said, "She's not failing because of me." My mother said, "But you could help." I said, "And she could work." My mother got quiet again, like I'd offended her. Then she said, "I don't recognize you." That sentence did more damage than she probably intended. I sat there with tears in my eyes and said, "Maybe you're finally seeing me." After that, I pulled back from my mother for a while. Not cutting her off, not dramatic. Just less. Less calls, less visits, less sharing. Because I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. My mother wasn't just enabling my sister. She was using me to keep the peace. She was trying to sacrifice me, softly, with a smile, because it was easier than dealing with my sister's rage. My husband noticed and said, "You're allowed to be mad at her." I said, "I'm not mad, I'm just tired." He said, "That's mad." He was right. Annoying, but right. Over the following months, my sister kept posting. It was the same cycle in different outfits. Betrayal quotes, vague captions, little jabs meant for me but aimed at anyone watching. My aunt still tried to forward screenshots like she was doing me a service. I kept saying, "Please stop," until she finally did. When my kid was old enough to walk, my sister tried a new move. She bought gifts and sent them through my mother. Stuffed animals, little outfits, toys. My mother would show up with a bag and say, "She just wanted the baby to have this." And my heart would do this annoying thing where it softened, because seeing a little sweater makes you think maybe someone is trying. But then I'd remember, gifts aren't accountability. Gifts are a shortcut. I told my mother I wasn't accepting anything unless my sister could speak to me directly and say, in plain words, "I'm sorry." My mother said, "That's too harsh." I said, "It's basic." My mother sighed and said, "You're making it hard." I said she made it hard. My mother stopped bringing the gifts. I knew she was still giving them to my sister, telling her I was not ready. Eventually, even that stopped. My sister either gave up or found other targets for her gestures. My sister probably told herself that meant I was petty. I let her. I didn't have the energy to correct the story she'd already decided to live in. The funniest part, in a dark way, is that my sister never stopped measuring everything against me. If my husband got a raise, she called it unfair. If I posted a photo of my kid at a playground, she called it showing off. If my parents came to my house for a birthday, she called it favoritism. There was no winning. There was only stepping out of the game. The day it finally clicked for me was weirdly small. My kid spilled juice on the floor and I cleaned it up without thinking, and I realized I wasn't tense. I wasn't waiting for a message. I wasn't bracing for another family explosion. I was just living. And I thought, oh, this is what peace feels like. It wasn't glamorous. It was sticky floor and laundry and a half-eaten snack. It was normal, and it was mine. A while after that, my father invited me to get coffee with him. Just us, like he used to when I was a teenager, and he'd take me to a little coffee shop to talk when my mother and sister were fighting. We sat outside, and he looked older than I remembered. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't stop this earlier." I said, "You tried." He shook his head. "I tried late," he said. "Your mother thought keeping the peace meant keeping her calm. I should have told your sister no more, years ago. I didn't even know what to do with that." I felt angry on his behalf and sad on my own behalf and relieved that someone was saying the truth out loud. I said, "I don't want to hate her." My father said, "You don't have to hate her, you just don't have to be her target." Then he looked at me and said, "Promise me you won't let anyone make your kid responsible for someone else's feelings." And I promised, because I knew exactly what he meant. By the time we got to the point where I could think about my sister without my chest tightening, she'd moved on to a new relationship. I found out because my aunt told my mother, and my mother told me, like it was evidence that my sister was doing better. She started posting happy pictures again. She started talking about growth. She started acting like the past was just a misunderstanding. Then, one evening, she messaged me a photo of herself with my kid from my parents' dinner years ago. That one moment before everything blew up. She wrote, "See? We were fine." That was it. Like the proof of our relationship was one random photo. Like the months of harassment and the public posts and the parking lot ambush didn't exist. I stared at the photo and felt this anger rise up like a wave. Then I felt something else. Softer. Pity. Because she really believed her own edits. I didn't respond. I just saved the screenshot and put my phone down. A few days later, she showed up at my door. Not banging, not screaming, just standing there with a bag, like she was delivering a peace offering. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. My husband was home, thank God. He stood behind me like a wall. I opened the door just enough to look at her. She smiled and said, "Can I come in?" I said no. Her smile tightened. "Seriously?" she said. "After all this time?" I said, "You still haven't apologized." She huffed, like I was being ridiculous. "I said I was stressed," she said. "I said I was going through stuff." I said, "That's not an apology." She looked past me into the house like she was trying to see my kid. "I brought gifts," she said. My husband said, calm and firm, "This isn't happening." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just stood there and made it clear we weren't negotiating. My sister's eyes flicked to him and she said, "This is what I mean. He controls everything." My husband didn't even blink. He said, "You're not coming in. Please leave." My sister's face reddened. She took a step forward like she might push. My husband stepped closer to the door, not touching her, but blocking. My sister stopped and stared, like she suddenly realized the world wasn't going to bend. She lowered her voice and said, "You're really going to do this? Keep me from my own family?" I said, "My family is inside this house, the one I built. You can be part of it when you can act like one." She stared at me for a long second, and I saw something in her face that looked almost like shame. Almost. Then she snapped it away and said, "Whatever." She shoved the bag into my hands like it was garbage and said, "Keep it. I tried." Then she walked away. I set the bag on the floor and stared at it like it was a bomb. My husband picked it up, walked it to the trash, and tossed it in without opening it. I started to protest, but then I stopped. Because honestly, I didn't want those gifts. I wanted accountability, and gifts can't replace that. That night, I lay awake thinking about how many times my sister had tried to rewrite the story, how many times she'd tried to change the ending without doing the hard part in the middle. and I realized something that hurt, but also freed me. She didn't want repair. She wanted access. She wanted the picture. She wanted the role. She didn't want the responsibility. So I stopped waiting for her. My mother slowly got better at respecting it. Not perfect. She'd still sigh sometimes and say, "It's sad." And it is sad. But she stopped pressuring me as hard. She started saying things like, "I wish it was different," instead of, "You need to fix it." My father stayed steady. He stopped taking calls from my sister when she started yelling. He ended conversations when she got manipulative. He started choosing peace too, not by giving in, but by refusing to participate. And me? I got used to being the villain in my sister's story. I stopped trying to audition for the role of the good sister. I stopped explaining myself to people who liked drama more than truth. I stopped letting my mother's sadness be a leash around my neck. I still have moments where something hits me out of nowhere, like when I see two sisters laughing in line at a coffee shop, or when a holiday photo pops up on a social media app, and I remember what it felt like to think we could be normal. I feel it. I let it be sad. Then I go home to my loud little life, the one with toys on the floor and dishes in the sink, and a kid who wants to be carried for no reason other than love. And if someone ever asks me, "Would you do it differently?" I don't say some noble speech. I don't say some dramatic lesson. I just say the truth. I would have stopped swallowing it sooner. I would have stopped trying to buy peace with my own comfort. I would have learned earlier that being the bigger person doesn't mean being the flatter person. Because I'm not flat anymore. I'm not quiet anymore. I'm not available for anyone's fantasy where I exist to fix them. I'm just a woman who got married in a modest little ceremony, saved what she could, built a home the slow way, and learned that sometimes the price of peace is being willing to disappoint people who only feel okay when you're the one hurting. I should mention that during all of this, the therapy, the boundaries, the growing peace, there was also the money thing that kept popping up like a bad smell. Because once my sister decided I was the one with everything, she started treating my life like it was a public resource. If my parents visited me, she'd text my mother, "Must be nice." If my mother bought my kid a birthday gift, my sister would say, "So you can spoil her, but you can't help me." Like love was a limited supply. Like my kid's toy was personally stolen from her pantry. One afternoon, my mother showed up at my house with that nervous smile and said, "Don't get mad." That sentence has never ended well in the history of mothers. She told me my sister had asked if she could use my parents' address to receive mail, just until things settle. I said, "Why?" My mother shrugged and said, "She says she's moving." I asked where. My mother didn't know. My sister hadn't said. She just wanted the address. I immediately thought about bills, collections, random chaos, and my parents getting dragged into something again. I said, "No." My mother said, "It's just mail." I said, "It's never just mail." My mother sighed and said, "You assume the worst." I said, "I assume the pattern." My mother tried to argue, but my father called her while she was in my driveway. I could hear his voice through the phone even though I wasn't the one holding it. He said, sharp, "Stop asking her. We already said no." My mother's shoulders dropped. She looked embarrassed. She said, quietly, "Okay." Then she looked at me and said, "I hate being in the middle." And I almost said, "You put yourself there." But I didn't. I just said, "Me too." A few weeks later, my sister tried another variation. She asked my mother to ask me for a cosign on an apartment. A cosign. Like I was going to attach my name to her chaos and just hope for the best. My mother called me and started the sentence like, "I know you're going to say no, but..." And I cut her off and said no. My mother said, "She says she has a plan." I said her plan is always someone else's safety net. My mother got quiet. Then she said, "You used to be softer." And that stung, because she meant it as criticism, but it was also true. I used to be softer. I used to bend so everyone else could stay comfortable. I said, "I used to think softness was my job." My mother whispered, "I'm just scared for her." I said, "I'm scared too. I'm just not sacrificing my kid because you're scared." That was the first time I heard my mother actually admit out loud that she was afraid of my sister. Not afraid in a physical sense. Afraid of her emotions, her blow-ups, her punishment. Afraid of what would happen if she didn't give her what she wanted. I realized my mother wasn't just enabling my sister because she loved her. She was enabling her because she didn't know how to survive her. And that's when I finally understood why my childhood felt like it did. My sister would rage, my mother would soothe, my father would shut down, and I would shrink to fit the space left over. I had been trained to be low maintenance, to be the easy one, to not add to the fire. So when I finally stopped shrinking, It felt like betrayal to them, like I was breaking an unspoken deal. My husband pushed me to talk to someone, not because he thought I was broken, but because he could see I was carrying too much. I found a therapist through my insurance, and I sat on a couch in a small office and cried about money and weddings and how much I hated the phrase, be the bigger person. The therapist said, being the bigger person often means being the quieter target. I stared at her and said, exactly. It was the first time I felt seen by someone who wasn't already tangled in the family web. Therapy didn't fix my sister. It didn't fix my mother's hope, but it helped me stop spiraling. My kid, oblivious to all of it, started calling my father Papa and making him laugh with nonsense stories about talking dinosaurs. Watching my father on the floor playing blocks, I realized this was the family that mattered. It helped me stop checking my phone like it was going to bite. It helped me stop feeling guilty for needing space. It helped me accept that you can love people and still not let them into your home. Around the same time, my father started changing too. Not in a dramatic way, in small, stubborn ways. He stopped giving my sister money. He stopped letting her talk over him. When she started blaming me on the phone, he'd say, I'm not discussing your sister, and end the call. My mother would get upset and say, you're making it worse. And my father would say, it's already worse. I'm just done pretending it isn't. My sister responded by punishing him. She stopped calling him on his birthday. She ignored him on holidays. She told people he was cold and heartless. It hurt him. I could tell it hurt him. But he kept the boundary anyway. Seeing that made me feel both proud and angry. Proud that he was finally stepping up. Angry that it took all this for him to do it. The last big flare-up happened when my kid was old enough to understand words. My sister posted something online about a child being used as a weapon, and my kid was sitting on the couch near me, humming, playing with blocks, and my mother called in tears because relatives were asking questions again. I hung up and I just stared at my kid and thought, no. Not just no to my sister, but no to the whole cycle. No more explaining, no more defending, no more letting other people's discomfort dictate my choices. I sent one message to the group chat with the relatives who kept poking at it. I didn't write a novel. I wrote, I'm not discussing my sister online. Please stop asking. If you have a relationship with her, keep it with her. Then I muted the chat. My hands were shaking when I hit mute. Then I felt calm. For the first time, I chose silence as protection, not as surrender. After that, the drama didn't vanish. My sister still existed. My mother still wished for a miracle. My aunt still tried to stir things. But my life got louder in a different way. Louder with normal stuff. School forms, doctor appointments, messy kitchen mornings, little arguments with my husband about who forgot to buy snacks. The kind of noise that means you're living, not surviving. And when my sister's name comes up now, it doesn't feel like I'm about to drown. It feels like a sad story that belongs to someone else. Because the truth is, I'm not interested in being the villain in her story anymore. I'm also not interested in being her hero. I'm just interested in being a mother who can breathe in her own house. I don't forgive her the way people like to demand you forgive family. I don't wish her harm either. I wish her therapy. I wish her a life where she stops comparing and starts living. But I also wish her far away from me. That's the part people hate. It's not a reunion. It's not a tearful hug. It's just a boundary that held, year after year, until it became ordinary. And honestly, ordinary felt like a miracle. My kid asks sometimes why there's no auntie in the family photos. I keep it simple. Sometimes people can't be nice, so we keep them at a distance. My kid shrugs and goes back to playing. And if that makes me the villain in someone else's story, I can live with that.